What would you do if two men looked at you as if you were the only woman left on Earth? The stagecoach rumbled across the red dirt road toward Copper Ridge, dust curling in the air like smoke. Inside, Eleanor Ashford sat rigid on the cracked leather seat, clutching a small satchel that carried everything she owned, and the letter that could change her life forever. She was 22, the only daughter of a once wealthy Boston banker whose bad luck and bad habits had sunk their family fortune. To save what little remained, he had sent her west with a simple instruction. Marry well, Eleanor. The Chamberlain brothers own half the territory. One of them will do. Eleanor had never seen land so wide, so wild, so endless. The sun blazed mercilessly overhead, and every building looked weather-beaten, leaning under the weight of time. The air smelled of smoke, horse sweat, and the metallic promise of danger. When the stage finally stopped in front of the Copper Ridge Hotel, a tired building pretending to be grand, Eleanor stepped out, her dark green traveling dress already dusted brown. She lifted her head, trying to appear composed. She had been trained to move with grace, to smile when she wanted to run, to survive the drawing rooms of Boston society. But this place was different. This land played by its own rules. Then she saw them. Two men standing across the street outside the saloon. Tall, broad, identical. They looked like they had been carved from the same mountain that loomed beyond the town. Twin brothers, the Chamberlains. They didn't speak, didn't move at first, just watched her. Their presence silenced even the rowdy laughter spilling from the saloon. When one of them removed his hat, sunlight caught his sandy blonde hair and eyes so blue they seemed almost unreal. The other, darker and quieter, stayed still but intense, his jaw tight, his hand resting on the wooden post beside him as if steadying himself. Eleanor's pulse stumbled. Her father's letter had warned her they were strong men, unschooled but wealthy. He hadn't mentioned that they could make a woman forget how to breathe. The hotel keeper's voice snapped her back. "Miss Ashford, we've got your room ready." She followed him inside, but she could still feel the twins' gaze on her back, heavy, unyielding, as if it reached through her corset and set her skin on fire. Her room was small, simple, and smelled faintly of dust and lavender. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, pressing cool fingers to her hot cheeks. Outside, laughter floated from the saloon, a piano slightly out of tune. Eleanor stood and crossed to the window. Through the thin glass, she saw them again, the brothers still there, leaning on the railing, talking in low voices. Then, as if sensing her, both looked up. She jerked away, heart pounding. That night, she didn't sleep. The sounds of Copper Ridge drifted through the walls, the creak of wagons, the cry of something wild on the plains, and in her mind, she saw their faces again. The confident smile of one, the quiet strength of the other. Her father's words echoed in her ears. Marry well, but there was something else in that look they had shared, something that had nothing to do with money or business. The morning sun rose fierce and golden. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best traveling suit, pinned her hair neatly, and slipped her father's letter of introduction into her bag. The hotel keeper, Mr. Garrison, told her, "The Chamberlain boys come into town around this time, usually the feed store." Her stomach twisted, but she nodded and went. Copper Ridge by daylight was alive with motion, wagon wheels clattering, women hurrying with baskets, men shouting to one another over the grind of work. Eleanor walked the wooden sidewalk, aware of every glance that followed her. Her Boston manners didn't belong here, but she refused to shrink. The feed store smelled of leather and hay. Dim light filtered through dusty windows. And then, there they were. Both brothers stood near the back, examining a length of rope. Up close, they seemed even larger, their presence filling the space like thunderclouds. The lighter-haired one looked up first. His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, everything else disappeared. He smiled slightly, and the world tilted. "Miss Ashford, isn't it?" His voice was deep, roughened by the West. Word travels fast here. His brother said nothing, just studied her with dark, unreadable eyes. Eleanor forced her legs to move closer. clutching the letter like a shield. "I have a message from my father," she said, surprised at how steady she sounded. "Jonathan Ashford of Boston. He asked me to deliver this personally." The talkative brother took it, his large hand closing around hers for a second longer than manners allowed. "Caleb Chamberlain," he introduced himself. "This is my brother, Jacob." Jacob gave a curt nod, his gaze never leaving her face. Caleb's thumb brushed over the folded paper. "Your father didn't say how long you'd be staying." "I'm not certain," she replied, heat rising in her cheeks. "Boston no longer offers many opportunities." Caleb's mouth curved. "Copper Ridge can be full of opportunity, Miss Ashford, if you're willing to take risks." The way he said it made her shiver. Behind him, Jacob shifted, his jaw tightening again. "We can discuss your father's business," Jacob said, his voice low and steady. "Over dinner tonight." Eleanor's breath caught. She should refuse, should insist on proper arrangements. But the way they stood, solid and sure, made her pulse race. "Yes," she said softly, "tonight." As she left the store, she could feel their eyes following her once again, the air between them alive with something she couldn't name. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a knock sounded at her hotel door. She opened it to find them both standing there, clean-shaven, their shirts pressed, but still carrying that same raw power. Caleb's eyes swept over her burgundy dress, and his smile deepened. "That dress, Miss Ashford, might just start a fire." Jacob's quiet voice followed, almost teasing. "Good fires are worth the risk." Eleanor's breath came faster. "Where are we going?" she asked. Caleb extended a hand to dinner. He said, his tone gentle but sure, "And maybe to the beginning of something you won't ever forget." And as she stepped out into the dusky light between the two towering brothers, Eleanor Ashford had the strangest feeling that her father's plan and her own life were about to take a turn she could never have imagined. The wind swept across the open prairie as the brothers led Eleanor out of town. The sky glowed deep orange, streaked with purple, as the sun dipped behind the mountains. She rode with Caleb beside her and Jacob slightly behind, their horses moving in rhythm. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. It carried a kind of tension that made her heart race. When the ranch came into view, Eleanor's breath caught. It stretched across a valley like something out of a dream. Rolling fields, cattle grazing, the faint glint of a river winding through the land. The house was large, sturdy, and surrounded by the hum of hard work. It was not the polished world of Boston she'd known. It was something far more alive. Caleb dismounted first and helped her down, his hands steady and warm. "Welcome to the Chamberlain Ranch," he said. "Everything you see we built with our own hands." Jacob followed silently, but when he offered his arm to guide her up the porch steps, his touch lingered just long enough to send a tremor through her. Dinner was served on the wide veranda beneath a sky filled with stars. A lantern flickered between them, casting soft light over roasted meat, bread, and fresh vegetables. The meal smelled of smoke and spice, the kind of food that spoke of survival and strength. Caleb filled her glass with wine. "Your father mentioned his business troubles," he said in a low voice. "We know why you're here." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her glass. "He wants me to marry into wealth," she said quietly. "He sent me to secure an alliance." Jacob's eyes darkened. "So you came out here to bargain your own future." The bluntness of his tone stung, but she met his gaze squarely. "I came here to save my family." Caleb leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You're braver than most who come this far," he said. "Boston girls don't usually survive the West." Then perhaps Boston underestimated me." The brothers exchanged a glance, one of those silent looks that seemed to carry entire conversations. Then Caleb smiled. "Maybe it did." The meal continued, the conversation shifting between laughter and serious talk. The brothers told stories about the early days of the ranch, storms that nearly destroyed it, rival ranchers who tried to take their land, the endless fight to make the soil yield. Eleanor listened, captivated. These were not men of words, they were men of deeds, and every story carried the weight of hard-earned truth. When the plates were cleared, Caleb stood and offered his hand. "Walk with us," he said softly. "There's something we want to show you." They led her out into the night. The air was cool now, the scent of sagebrush sharp and clean. The stars stretched endless above them. They walked until the house was just a glow behind them, the land opening wide and wild around them. Caleb stopped first. "This land," he said, his voice quieter now, "cost us everything we had. Every scar, every drop of blood, every friend we buried, it's all here." Jacob came to stand beside him. "We built it together. We share everything. Always have." Quote. Eleanor looked between them, unsure where the conversation was leading. "Your partnership seems strong," Caleb turned to her, his expression unreadable in the starlight. "It is. We don't believe in dividing what's meant to be whole." Her breath caught. "What are you saying?" Jacob stepped closer until his presence surrounded her. "We don't see life in halves," he said softly. "If we take a risk, we both take it. If we care for something, someone, we share that too." Eleanor's heart pounded so hard it hurt. The meaning behind his words was clear now, but she couldn't speak. Caleb reached out, his fingers brushing her chin, tilting her face upward. "We're not offering you a deal," he said. "Not a contract, not a name on paper. We're offering you something real, a life out here, with us." "With both of you," she whispered. Jacob's answer was simple, yes. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind sweeping through the grass. It was madness, unthinkable by every rule she'd ever known. But standing between them, she felt the truth in her bones. This was the West. Here life didn't follow rules, it followed the heart. Caleb's voice was low, steady. "We won't rush you. Think about it tonight. Tomorrow, you tell us your choice." He reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch reverent. "But know this. Whatever you decide, you'll always have our respect." Jacob nodded once, "and our protection." The brothers turned back toward the house, leaving her standing in the moonlit field, her heart caught between fear and longing. When she finally returned to her room, she pressed trembling fingers to her lips. She had come to Copper Ridge to make a transaction. Instead, she had stumbled into something wild and impossible, a love that defied every boundary she had ever known. That night, as the wind whispered through the open window and the stars burned bright above the prairie, Eleanor Ashford lay awake, knowing that by morning, her life would never be the same again. The morning light spilled through the curtains, soft and golden. Eleanor woke with her heart still pounding from restless dreams filled with blue eyes, whispered promises, and the wide, endless plains. Today, she had to choose. Her reflection in the small mirror looked different. Her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter. The timid banker's daughter from Boston seemed like a memory now. She took a deep breath, pinned her hair up neatly, and walked downstairs. Both brothers were waiting in the ranch's main room, their faces unreadable. Caleb leaned against the desk, sunlight catching the gold in his hair. Jacob stood by the window, silent as always, his arms folded across his chest. "Did you sleep?" Caleb asked softly. Eleanor nodded, though she hadn't slept much enough to make a decision. Jacob turned then, his dark eyes meeting hers. "And what have you decided, Miss Ashford?" Her heart was racing, but her voice came out clear that I didn't come all this way to live half a life. "If I stay here, it will be because I choose it, not because of my father, not because of his debts, but because of what I've seen and what I feel." Caleb straightened, taking a step closer. "And what do you feel?" Eleanor looked at them both. "These two men so different, and yet so much the same. I feel safe here," she said quietly and alive. "You said the West doesn't believe in half measures." "Neither do I." She smiled faintly. "So if I belong here, I suppose I belong to both of you." For a moment, silence filled the room, thick and electric. Then Caleb reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm. "You have no idea how long we've waited to hear that." Jacob moved behind her, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "You'll never regret it, Eleanor," he said softly. "We'll make sure of that." The tension in her chest broke, replaced by something fierce and certain. For the first time since leaving Boston, she wasn't afraid. That afternoon, they rode into town together. People stopped and stared, some curious, others whispering behind hands, but Eleanor kept her head high. The minister, a kind old man who had seen too much of life to judge, performed the ceremony with a knowing smile. Caleb spoke the vows aloud, but Jacob's hand never left her shoulder. And when it was done, Both brothers kissed her in turn, sealing the promise that bound the three of them together. The ride back to the ranch felt different. The land looked brighter, the air lighter. For the first time, Eleanor saw it not as a prison of duty, but as home. The weeks that followed were full of learning. She rose before dawn, helping with the horses and learning to ride properly under Jacob's quiet instruction. Caleb taught her about the ranch accounts, showing her how every fence post and steer fit into a larger picture. She began to understand the rhythm of the land, the way the air changed before rain, the way the soil smelled at dusk, the way hard work left her exhausted but proud. Evenings became her favorite time. They would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains, the three of them shoulder to shoulder. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't need to. The silence between them said enough. Months passed, and Eleanor grew into her new life, like a tree taking root. The timid girl from Boston was gone. In her place stood a woman who could ride across open land without fear, who could balance ledgers by lamplight, who could face storms with her head high. One evening, 6 months after her arrival, the brothers came in from the fields carrying a small package wrapped in cloth. Caleb set it on the table before her, his eyes bright. "We've got something for you," he said. Inside was a ring, simple but beautiful. A single band of gold intertwined with 2 strands of silver, the 3 metals braided together. "It's a symbol," Jacob said quietly. 3 lives, 3 hearts, woven together into something stronger. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as Caleb slipped the ring onto her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. The brothers smiled, the same proud, gentle smile that had undone her from the very beginning. Jacob wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and Caleb took her hand. The 3 of them stood together, the sun dipping low outside, turning the fields golden. "This is your home now," Caleb said softly. "Ours." Together, Eleanor looked out across the land they had built, the land that had built her, and she felt something deep and unshakable take hold inside her. She had come to Copper Ridge as a desperate girl searching for salvation. She had found strength, freedom, and a love that defied every rule she had ever known. As the stars began to shimmer above the plains, Eleanor Chamberlain knew she had chosen right. The banker's daughter from Boston was gone. In her place stood a woman of the West, strong, brave, and fiercely loved. The world could whisper, the townsfolk could gossip, but she had everything she would ever need. 2 hearts, 1 home, and a life wild enough to match her own.